It took 25 years to solve this horrifying story. An American university student disappeared without a trace after leaving a party. The police had a suspect from the early days but couldn't prove his guilt. Only decades later, the podcast author unearthed chilling details of the case, attracting the attention of millions and prompting the police to reopen the investigation. Kristin Smart was born on February 20, 1977, in the German city of Augsburg, but moved to the United States with her parents, brother, and sister at an early age. The family settled in Stockton, California. Her parents worked as teachers for children of American servicemen. After graduating from high school in 1996, Kristin enrolled at California Polytechnic State University. In her free time from studies, she worked as a lifeguard at the campus recreational center. On May 25th of that year, a large party was planned at the fraternity house to celebrate a student's birthday. Kristin intended to go, but her friends decided against it. So, she went to the fraternity house alone. The party was typical for American students, lots of drinking, music, and fun. That evening, Kristin had too much to drink, felt unwell, and around 2 in the morning, she headed back to her dormitory. However, she could barely walk on her own. Seeing her on the street, to other students, Cheryl Anderson and Tim Davis decided to escort her home. Both had been at the party. Sometime later, another student joined them, Paul Flores, who also attended the party. He offered to walk Kristin to her dormitory since he lived closest. Cheryl and Tim, who needed to go in a different direction, said goodbye and left. Since then, no one has seen Kristin alive. Initially, her disappearance wasn't taken very seriously. Kristin's roommate, Margarita Campos, was the first to become concerned. She was sure her friend would return home after the party, but that never happened. Adding to the alarm was the fact that all of Kristin's belongings, including her passport, wallet, and bank cards, were left in her room. This meant she couldn't have simply left on her own. Margarita contacted campus police only 2 days after Kristin disappeared. Apparently, she had hoped until the last moment that Kristin was all right and would come back home. However, campus police didn't take Margarita's report seriously. It was a weekend followed by Memorial Day, dedicated to fallen American servicemen. Local police simply assumed Kristin had gone home, and they weren't bothered by the fact that all her important belongings and documents were left behind in the dormitory. It's worth noting that the distance from the university campus to Kristin's hometown was a 7-hour drive. That's too far to suddenly embark on such a journey without money and documents, especially in the middle of the night. Several days later, local police finally decided to act and called the girl's parents. Kristin's mother informed them that her daughter hadn't been home or called in the last few days. This call made her mother worrying, and Kristin's parents went to the police. However, even there, the police were not eager to open an investigation. They stated that not much time had passed since Kristin's disappearance and she could have just gone out with friends. It was only on the 4th day after her disappearance that searches began. Volunteers initially searched for the girl, but their efforts yielded no results. The first thing the police did was question Paul Flores, who had offered to walk Kristin to her dormitory door and was supposed to be the last person to have seen her. He told detectives that he and Kristin made it to her dormitory and then parted ways, after which he supposedly went straight to bed. However, discrepancies in his story were quickly uncovered. Paul's dorm neighbors saw him heading to the showers around 5 a.m., while he and Kristin had parted ways around 2 a.m. Additionally, he had a bruise under his eye and scratches on his knees. When questioned by several people, he provided 3 different explanations for how he got these injuries. Paul Flores appeared highly suspicious, but there were no direct evidence against him. A month passed since Kristin's disappearance, and the police expanded the search area to her hometown. Journalists amplified the case, drawing parallels to a popular TV show, Twin Peaks. News even mentioned psychics who claimed to have solved the case, suggesting that Kristin was murdered by 2 men on campus grounds, then taken to a cliff and thrown into the water. Naturally, these claims yielded nothing for the police. A year after Kristine's disappearance, her parents sued Flores, accusing him of involvement in their daughter's disappearance. In 1997, Paul testified under oath, but he only answered one question: his name. For all other questions, he invoked the Fifth Amendment, which allows an individual to avoid self-incrimination. Following this, Paul's parents sued Kristine's family for causing them emotional harm. However, both lawsuits led nowhere. The police lacked evidence to hold Paul accountable. On May 25, 2002, the 6th anniversary of Kristine's disappearance, authorities officially declared her deceased. Despite all this time, they had not come any closer to solving the case. This continued until 2018, when California resident Chris Lambert decided to start his own podcast series dedicated to various crimes. Chris was 8 years old at the time of Kristine's disappearance and remembered the chilling story from the news. After 22 years, he conducted his own investigation and was shocked by how negligently the police had handled the case all this time. His first step was to talk to all witnesses of the events. From university students, he learned that Paul Flores had a bad reputation. He had harassed female students multiple times, though no official complaints were ever made. Chris then analyzed the police's actions and concluded they had made several critical errors. Detectives only visited Paul's father, Ruben Flores, home 2 months after Kristine's disappearance. Considering Paul lived with his father, the police should have searched the residence immediately. However, when they finally conducted the search, it was done very carelessly. Detectives didn't bring forensic specialists or cadaver dogs trained to detect decomposition odors with them. Because of this, the search essentially turned out to be useless. Detectives also failed to search to vehicles belonging to the Flores family, one of which Paul could have used to transport Kristine from the campus to his father's house. Several months after the police visit, one of the cars was sold and the second was allegedly stolen. Police didn't even visit Paul's mother's house, where one of the main pieces of evidence was hidden. Chris Lambert discovered that for months after Kristine's disappearance, a woman named Mary Lassiter rented Paul's mother's house. In one of the rooms, she found an earring that strongly resembled the necklace Kristine was wearing at the time of her disappearance. This necklace was also featured in photos of Kristine posted on billboards throughout the county. Mary noticed the resemblance and took the earring to the police. And what do you think happened? The police initially refused to include the earring as evidence in the case, and later they actually lost the earring. But what Chris found out next is truly shocking. The yard at Paul's mother's house had always been paved with concrete, but shortly after Kristine's disappearance, a piece of concrete was cut out and a flower bed was dug there. That already seems strange, but it gets even more interesting. Mary Lassiter, who rented the house, told Chris a very chilling fact. During the first period after moving in, every day at 4:20 a.m. and 4:20 p.m., she heard a sound resembling the alarm of a digital wristwatch. The sound came from the backyard, straight from under that flower bed. One day, the sound stopped. Either the watch's battery died, or it was dug up and moved. Chris Lambert headed to Kristine's mother to tell her about this. Upon hearing the story about the alarm, the woman was speechless with shock and couldn't speak for several minutes. Then she finally said that Kristine always set her alarm for 4:20 a.m. because she had to be at work at the campus recreation center by 5 a.m. When Lambert's podcast aired in 2019, it was listened to by over 6 million people. The public was shocked that the police had been inactive all this time, allowing the killer to remain free. The new leads uncovered by Chris only intensified public outrage. As a result, the police department decided to reopen the case. This time, more than 20 years later, they did their job properly. They conducted searches at 4 locations, including Paul Flores's house. Initially, the police only reported that they had found evidence of interest to the investigation. On January 29, 2020, law enforcement announced that they had seized 2 of Paul's cars as evidence. Later, it became known that they finally excavated the yard at Paul's mother's house, but Kristine's body was not found there. However, police assured that they had obtained evidence indicating the presence of human decomposition traces under the flower bed. On February 11, 2021, news broke that Paul Flores had been arrested. However, the reason for this was not Kristine's disappearance, but rather possession of unregistered firearms. On March 15th, a judge issued a search warrant for Paul's father's house, and on April 13th, both father and son were arrested in connection with Kristine's disappearance. Paul was charged with murder, while his father was charged with being an accessory. According to the investigation, when Paul and Kristine were alone, Paul began to make advances towards her but was rebuffed. This explains the origin of the scratches and bruises. In the ensuing struggle, Paul allegedly killed Kristine, then loaded her into a car and drove her to his home. There, he and his father buried her body in the backyard under the guise of a flower bed. At some point later, they decided to unearth the remains and move them to an undisclosed location. Both father and son have pleaded not guilty, and the trial is ongoing. However, with such a set of facts and evidence, they are unlikely to avoid punishment, even though justice has been delayed for a long 25 years. Kristine's parents made a public statement, thanking Chris Lambert and the millions of people who cared for collectively uncovering the truth. Now, they can only wait for the trial to conclude and for the perpetrators to receive their punishment.